So first up is François Helt. He's a scientific consultant for Eclair Laboratories. He's had a long career that includes digital film restoration software and projection measurement systems. And he will now present his paper on visual perceptual entropy measure, a theoretical framework on perceptual reproduction quality assessment.
Thank you, Kylie. Thank you. Thank you, SMPTE. It's my 10th accepted paper for SMPTE, at least in the 21st century. But that doesn't make things easier for me. So I start my presentation. It's a theoretical proposal. I've been working on it for some time, thinking, I had some intuition about that. So I tried to put that on paper and explain along everything. It's not finished. You see there are some difficulties with this kind of computations. I tried a computation to do the full evaluation. It took a few days, so I stopped my computer because it's really a bit complicated for color. So it's about a theoretical framework, I say, trying to take into account the perception. And I explain a bit what this Greek word used, perception or perceptual, means exactly. So it's about vision. It's not about quality evaluation, really. You know, quality is the word which imply a goodness or badness. So what is a good image? What is a bad image? I don't know. I don't know how to put that in equations, at least. So I make 3 claims in this paper. There are existing perceptual measure, but they don't, in my opinion, they don't fill the gap. They're about things that are not really complete. So I explain why I'm trying to push something else. The second claim is that the entropy, which is a difficult topic, is the proper estimator for this this reproduction evaluation. And then the third claim is about the way you present the results. It's difficult to present the results as a single number. So you must split between lightness and color, or chromatic to be correct. So I first talk about the perceptual metrics, then I try to talk about the difference between perception and sensation, and then a bit about entropy, some difficulties, and some of the results I've been having. So what kind of measurements, in fact? The existing approach using the word perception or perceptual are of 2 kinds. There are visual performance and image quality. The visual performance is something you've heard about Barton. The Barton works they have been used to devise something which is trying to evaluate the response to threshold. So the main concern is the measurements of the visual contrast threshold. On the other hand, image quality is looking at video compression or image compression and comparing either the quality of image after compression compared to the original image, or comparing 2 different compression schemes. So visual performance is really about this kind of an image. That is, all the studies to detect the threshold of contrast are using very simple images that are far from the image we're used to see in projection in movies. This Barton has been doing a seminal work on trying to build a model based on many subjective tests. And it was studying the threshold sensation, that is what was really detected by the eye of somebody, a mean. It's not everybody doesn't have the same kind of performance, visual performance. So it's an average. This model has been used to do some work, some standards that are used today. You've certainly heard about the PQ, the perceptual quantizer. This has been based on work by the DC28, the ad hoc group, and that were used to assess that 12 bits for digital cinema was enough to convey correctly the thresholds for visual sensation. But there are two. This ad hoc group worked on a specific version of using this model called the Barton ramp. And in fact, there are two uses of the model, the Barton ramp and the Barton flat. And Barton ramp is twice as more permissive as the Barton flat. The perceptual quantizer is using the Barton ramp. Image quality. So this work on image quality are done to compare different video compression schemes, and it's based on supra-threshold. That is, it's based on normal images. The thresholds are not really what we're looking at in this kind of measurements. So what is perception? There is a difference between perception and sensation. Usually, we think there are many debates about sensation and perception, but usually perception is thought about something which is after sensation. And the measurements, the physical measurements by different tools, are only addressing the sensation, or at least the physical, the physical values that are causing the sensation. And the different tests or experiments that I've done and that have been the base of the Barton model are based on sensation, of course, but it's always perception, because you're asking somebody to say, did you see a red? Did you see a green? Is that something close to what you've seen before? So there's always an answer that is asked from these people. So it's a conscious way of getting an answer. It's far from the sensation. It is after it. So I try to illustrate the difference between sensation and perception. This is a sensation. There are different physical values, physical phenomena that are reaching the eye, and each sensor in the eye is having a sensation, is having an evaluation of what is reaching this sensor. But this is part of an image, and so that's the perception. So there is, if you are asking somebody to say what is so, he would say Red Bull, tomato, whatever, and not a mix of different shades of red. So there has been, and it's quite interesting, there are some references in the paper if you want to have more explanation about that. But there has been recent brain imagery tests where people are comparing subliminal image, which are thought to be unconscious sensation, to perception of the same object. And these imagery tests are showing that approximately the first 0.2 of the second, the influx are following exactly the same pattern, and then going from the eye to the visual areas. For subliminal image, it stopped there. There is nothing more. For perception, there are connections back from the visual areas to other areas in the brain. So at least it is supporting the fact that sensation and perception are something different, and perception is a bit more than sensation. So the common language is using perception, and this word is used everywhere. You have perception and perceptual quantizer, for example, but it's really about the sensation, on our senses. And the magnitude of sensations, I repeat, are not evaluated directly. They are always the result of questions that we are asking to the people that are participating in the experiment. On the other hand, material instruments are measuring the physical phenomena, not the sensations themselves, and certainly not the perception. I try to explain more about the difference between sensation and perception and what the measurement systems are telling about an image. Here I picked all these images are mine, in fact. Here I picked some of the colors of the above image and started to make a mosaic of color patches of the image. So for measuring instruments, both images are the same. But the measuring instruments are really looking at patches of color or looking at different patterns, and the variations in between are inferred. So this is not really what the image looks like. If, for example, something that has been pointing to recently, the observer metabolism. The observer metabolism, due to different projection system, for example, or rendering system, will change suddenly the mosaic of patches, not the image itself. I mean, you may change a bit the color or the perception of color on the above image, but suddenly we recognize the same thing. It's a butterfly, by the way. It's a night butterfly that flies by day. On top of that, the color measurements are using a model of color that has been used for quite a time, the CIE in 1931, and it's also an average. And the measurements are only valid if you're looking at small patches in a gray environment. And that doesn't exist really in the measurements that we're doing in the real world, at least in the audiovisual world. So we are far from these kind of color measurements. And we are using those measurements to say that the systems are adapted or not to and are equal. So if measurements are good enough, I mean, it's good for align many systems together. So I use the word perception if I'm aware that perception is not exactly the word that would be used if we are trying to build a model of sensations or a model of physical phenomena. So the measurements apply to sensation, but I repeat, the sensation are measured or asked to people through perception, in fact. Entropy, that's something I like much, so it's not my first paper using entropy. But I think entropy is the proper, is a good estimator for this kind of thing. So this entropy this measure doesn't try to measure defect per se. Is if there are two systems with different entropy, that is not implying that one system is showing more defect than the other. It doesn't apply this way. It doesn't work this way, in fact. It's just trying to assess the effectiveness of encoding using a given reproduction technology. Entropy is measuring, in fact, as if I'm trying to sum up entropy, it's measuring the number of possible configuration. And using a certain workflow, you will end up with less configuration depending on the workflow you're using. So this measurement is trying to assess the effectiveness of reproduction system. And one thing which is quite important is that the evaluation must include a model of visual perception. So why? As I said, the entropy is related to the number of configuration, but there are configurations that look the same for perception. For example, if there are small differences in the high values, the sensation and therefore the perception will exactly be the same. So this must be taken into account. If, of course, if these variations cannot be detected, so we must not count them. This is one of the schematic that is proposed in 1948 by Shannon in his mathematical model of communication. He used the word entropy to describe that. Some people think entropy is a bad word for that. Anyway, that's what was used. So what are the original configuration? What must be the origin for computation? This must be based on the graded images. That is the movie that was graded and accepted as such by the creative team. And this is the reference. The reference is not in the original images, not in the uncoded images, but on the coded image decoded for the creative team. So this is the starting point. And the measurement is trying to compare the configuration that are shown through a certain workflow by the reproduction system. So there is a point, again, it's a bit probably better explained in the paper, in the manuscript. I retain the equiprobability. Equiprobability is the first condition for computing entropy correctly. So it's not the assessment value is not computed based on the average of a certain number of movies. Every configuration must be possible for the creative team. Things of the past, things of a certain culture, and I'm French, so my culture is different from the US ones. This kind of thing, this kind of difference must not be, in my opinion, must not be counted into the figures. So every possible configuration is the starting point. This is a phrase, a sentence I like very much. Not only problems have solutions, but are also difficulties. So I had presented first in 2014 a paper where I was doing the calculation for lightness. Color was a different thing, and I had difficulties trying to go to the end with this, the calculation for the color case. So the multi-dimensional case is taken care of, and I showed that it was only necessary to use histogram and as the basis for computation. But this kind of computation cannot be used for color because the size, the number of configuration, what is called the alphabet size, is really too large to be easily computed. So you need a supercomputer to do that. For 12 bits, just the example for 12 bits, there are 2 to the power of 36, that is more than 64 giga configuration. So, and the results are quite difficult to interpret if you're building such a large histogram. So it's not possible to use that. But at least there is the possibility to do some computation for color. And that's the first thing I did. So to be practical in the current implementation, the color space used is going through a certain transform, and digital cinema is using XYZ, and some of the HDR digital cinema are using a different color space. And my first attempt was to try to calculate these values based on these color space. So I devised a very simple program that was counting all the number of configurations that went through these color spaces. Even simply counting with this software, it was half an hour of computation, so even with a powerful computer. So it's quite high. So this is showing the results of going through XYZ color space, or the ACES CG color space. And you show that you can see that using XYZ, there are only 37% of the combination that are going through. Using a different color space like AP1 or ACES CG, there are 70% of combination that are going through. So really, and instead of starting with a bit depth of 36, it's in one case 34, a bit more, 34 and a half, and the other case, it's 35.5. So 1 bit is twice as much. 1 bit less is twice less. So it's half of the combination only carried through a certain color space compared to the other one. If I want to measure completely the workflow, I must take into account compression. And I didn't succeed preparing for this paper all the calculation for compression. But I think, and this is something I want to continue, but as a first approximation, compression is quite transparent. It changes some of the aspect of the images. It, in my opinion, doesn't influence too much number of configuration that can be transferred. Of course, there are some impact, and the number, the entropy will be a bit less. So I had this computation about the color spaces. Then there is the calculation for brightness. There are different perception model. One standard perception model for suprathreshold is the CIE lightness L star. It corresponds approximately to the perception, again, sensation of brightness. And it is using a power law of a third. And it does the balance between low lights and high lights, in fact. So I'm using this, and I was using this in my paper in 2014 to compute how lightness is conveyed from the coding to the perception through a certain reproduction system. So in XYZ model, it's quite easy because Y is already coded in the color spaces. For AP1, brightness must be computed from the XYZ because it's something slightly different. And of course, it remains to check how the valid luminance is perceived. And color is a different business. So it's something, I would say it's a work which is not really finished. That's why I'll continue to work on this, and thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please tap the like button and also subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we add new content. For more information about us, please visit SMPTE.org. We'll see you next time.